Altogether, we have 6 sessions, 2 tonight. Chris told me I need to be done sometime before 11. All right. 7:15 is before 11 also, right? So sometime before 11. We have 2 tomorrow morning, and then we have 2 on Sunday, which can be accessed, I think, through recordings anyway. The overall rubric or title is a kind of a thematic phrase that we've been using at Jerusalem University College for the last few years. Read the land, see the text, live the book. Usually we think about reading the text and seeing the land, but we change the verb. Read the land, see the text. There's a certain fluency that we can gain in the landscape, in the resources of the land, in where you are. How many of you are living where you're native? I mean, where you've lived for like all your life or most of your life. Some of you have, right? Or at least a long, long time. And it's more or less in this area, I guess, this central western, what do you call it, New York area, western New York? Okay. And there are things about this part of the state, part of North America, that you know because you are born here, you grew up with it. They become intuitive. You just sort of sense it. Weather patterns and fertility and population and how to get from here to there and all kinds of things. You just get to know, and they become part of you. And I'm not from here. I can't tell you much about New York other than what I read in the news, and that's not the kind of stuff you want me to know to begin with, right? About this fine state. I only come by what I know about New York secondhand or thirdhand. You're fluent in this land. The way that you would read a text, you're fluent in where you are, where you live. And that's the goal, the end goal, about getting to know the land of the Bible as well. And like becoming fluent in reading or in learning another language, it takes a long time. Probably more than a lifetime, but we can start. We can at least begin. You learn the alphabet to read a text. You learn the types of limestone to begin to read the land. And pretty soon, you don't have to think about how to pronounce the letters anymore. You don't have to think about what the limestone means anymore. You can add other layers to that. And we'll come back to this analogy later in, I think, the next session tonight. All of that helps us then to see things in the text that we haven't seen before, let alone visual images when geography is mentioned in the text. And there's so much geography in the text, all you have to do is this, and you found some. All right? It's every place. It's every place in the text. And we'll look at some of it as we go. We don't want it to be an academic exercise. We want it to be something that changes who we are. Hence, live the book. Live the book. So tonight, a couple of sessions on larger issues to help us look at the landscape, perhaps the way ancient Israel did. Not comprehensively, but a couple of examples. Reading the land tomorrow, we'll look that plus some more detailed passages of the Bible, some Psalms and some other things, some things in Genesis, in some detail in order to see the text. And then Sunday, as it should be, it's more, apply it for life. This just disappeared on me. I need some help. Apply it for life, so we'll live the book. We'll live the book on, I think I touched it wrong. It says something. It went blank on me. I need, I was born in the 19th century, all right? And there I still live. We are still artifacts, right, as we go. So we'll do all of that. We'll do all of that. There is a geographical voice in the Bible. Usually we talk about, how the people speak, the characters speak, how the authors are speaking, how God is speaking. There's also a geographical voice. The land itself is a character in some of the stories. It takes on, the writers of the Bible gave it persona that people have. It was seen as a living being, not in a polytheistic sort of ancient Near Eastern way. We'll talk about that on Sunday morning in Sunday school. But as a living being, as a thing created, as a part of the environment in which we live. And the biblical writers used realities of their land to speak about other realities, larger spiritual realities. We'll talk about that as we go along as well. So the reality becomes an image for another reality of the heart. All of that is coming as we go. The Bible is jam-packed full of real people living in real places at a specific time. This sets it apart from other sacred texts that are either strictly theological, philosophical, or speak about landscapes that would be otherworldly and not here. And God's decision to communicate eternal truth through human beings, fallible as we are, to wrap up his divine message in a lot of mundane things, in the city gate, on the threshing floor, in crowded, busy streets, as the narrative line that we read about of people living and acting in the Bible becomes very real. Humbling and compelling, it tells us that we can best understand or better understand God's revelation to us when we sort of kneel down and listen to the real heartbeat of the people that it was given to in the time of the Bible. And we'll find that even though that physical context might be very different than our own, we may define wilderness as a term differently than they did in the Bible. Those who have been to the north woods of Minnesota certainly describe wilderness differently than they would have in the Bible. But even though those physical things, the tangible things might be a bit different, even though it's a long time ago in a place far away, to quote a movie about Star Wars, I think. We find that the real life situations that people were facing, the things of the heart, haven't changed a whole lot. And we'll see that as well as we go, especially tomorrow when we look at Genesis and the patriarchs in Genesis. Geography tends to scare a lot of people off. It's that class you had to take in high school and didn't want to, right? One of those subjects, right? And we could spend our time doing, let's say, the hardcore geography, right? The list of chemicals in the Dead Sea, or the detailed weather patterns that meteorologists love to tell you and have to simplify it on TV, right? And all these kinds of things are part of it, the things that show up in the technical scientific journals and things. I'm guessing that if we started that way, that at our second session in about an hour, we'd have less people here. All right? So we'll leave that alone. I'm more interested in historical geography, or cultural geography, people living on the land and how the land influenced them. And if we can get to the point where we can start to see the land of the Bible through the eyes of the Bible people, what they considered to be important, how they saw where they lived. We have a text that helps us do that. They left us their thoughts, actually, some of them, in this book. when we start to listen for the geographical voice. And it helps. It helps. So what I want to do this first session, the title is Approaching the Bible Through Its Geographical Context. Cats, mice, and the lands of the Bible. Cats and mice in the lands of the Bible. And I'll need some help from you as we go along. And maybe you can chime in a bit for some questions. Let me jump to this picture. It should be the second one. In your handout, you'll have, I think, I forget which picture you have in your handout. I don't know. But you have something like this with other language on it, perhaps. All right? In your handout. But let's start here. I think it is this one, yeah? Tin and horses and silk. Is that what it has in your handout? It is. Okay. All right. Whoops. All the way at the front. Okay. No. Already up front. So let's start here. The map that you see here, all the way up, this one, on the big picture, on the little picture, sorry, on the two on the top. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Right? That's this one. All right, it's the first one. This picture is a map of, we'll call it the world of the Bible, the known world of the biblical writers. And I want to look at both the right-hand side and the left-hand side as we go and characterize it. For now, just look at the blue is the water, right, and the brown is the land mass, right? The right-hand side of the map is what we would call perhaps the ancient Near East. The left-hand side of the map, the Mediterranean or classical world. All right? The right-hand side of the map is mostly land. The left-hand side is mostly water, in terms of where the people are living. The right-hand side, the natural routes are mostly camel caravan roads. On the left-hand side, it's mostly ships. Ships of the sea on the left, ships of the desert, you might say, camels on the right. On the right-hand side, mostly desert and mountain. On the left-hand side, even though the Mediterranean is surrounded by desert and mountain, the living space is tight next to it, so a lot of ports and busy life and so on. The right-hand side, the deserty, dry, camel caravan-y, mountainous area is essentially the world of the Old Testament. And the left-hand side, essentially the world of the New Testament. The Bible shifts scene, doesn't it? Goes from right to left as you go. The middle of the map, I made a green oval around it. The middle of the map is the seam between the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean. Actually, properly belongs to both. It belongs to both. The busy corridor between the two actually belongs to both. I'm showing highways on the map. The blue routes are the ones that are sweeping either out of Greece or Rome, coming into the eastern seaboard. You've got one as well coming off of the Persian Gulf, the right-hand side, up the Euphrates River. You can see where the blue line is kind of squiggling up onto the land. That's the Euphrates River. The Euphrates is of the Tigris and the Euphrates, the two rivers of Mesopotamia. That's the navigable one. The Tigris, it's kind of like the Niagara River right before it goes over the falls. It goes a bit too fast to be well navigable. It's more like the Missouri, just kind of slow and sluggish. The Euphrates is. And one up the Red Sea as well, you see that's pointing up toward the Mediterranean. And then the red routes, of course, are the camel caravan routes. You can see that the Nile River has both a blue arrow and a red one running next to it. So Egypt is going to have a special position as we go. And what I'm showing you on this map, at least initially, in heavy black, well, tiny, I guess, but black print. What I'm showing you in black print are the big commodities, the expensive things. You know, the Lamborghinis and all of this stuff, right? The F-16s. You know, the expensive stuff that's moving in the ancient world out of Europe, silk, even though silk didn't become, out of Asia, my mistake. Out of Asia, China, even though this didn't become a significant commodity until later, silk, other expensive semi-precious stones is well coming out of Asia, out of the Saudi Peninsula, spices for perfumes and other things. You know, when you go to the store and buy that bottle of perfume, it's like 99.9% what? Water. But that little bit of spice in there makes the value go up a whole lot more than just a bottle of water, right? And the Roman world knew that. The Mediterranean world knew that as well. Spices, frankincense and myrrh. Out of southern Egypt, gold. Today, Sudan, ancient Nubia. Coming up the Nile. Out of Europe, we have tin, which you have to mix. Bronze is local. Tin and bronze makes copper. You can actually use it now. Sorry. Copper is local. Copper and tin makes bronze. I had that backwards, you see. Copper and tin makes bronze, which means a usable metal. Tin actually doesn't come from where I show it. Tin comes from England, Cornwall, England, or Spain. But that's not on the map, so I had to put it at the end of the map that you see here, right? And then by the time the Old Testament story is functioning, horses are coming out of Turkey as well. The big commodities, the ones that are expensive and moving around on these highways that you see, number one. Now, let me shift a bit and make point number B. I don't know if it's B on your outline or not, but I'll make it point number B. The right-hand side of the Fertile Crescent, the right-hand side of the map has the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Kind of that middle left part has the Nile. James Henry Breasted, the Orientalist from the University of Chicago in 1916, looked at the two, the Tigris and the Euphrates on the one hand, down toward the Nile on the other, labeled it the Fertile Crescent. I think that's maybe a term that many of you have heard of, the Fertile Crescent. Both ends of the Fertile Crescent, the Mesopotamia end, the right-hand side of the map, and the Egypt end, sort of already pushing over into the Mediterranean. Both ends of the Fertile Crescent have something in common. World-class rivers running through, all right, water all the time, running through deserts. What is today the Iraqi desert and the Egyptian Sahara Desert. The water running through all the time brings renewable, not just something to drink and sort of grow your plants with, but renewable soil. Every time it floods, there's a flood season, it brings the soil out into the ground, which is level on both sides, very flat on both sides. And as it floods, it brings soil, the Tigris and Euphrates from eastern Turkey, the Nile from Ethiopia, and the Great Lakes of Africa, Lake Victoria. And it renews the land, both in terms of water and soil, for the next growing season. The Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates are also channels of communication, linking people together, linking people, economy and language, and society and culture together. And it is in both places, both of these ends of the Fertile Crescent, that we have the beginnings of what social historians call civilization. I'm not sure anymore we know what that word means, civilization. But it meant urbanization. It meant a chance for cities to develop and visible economic and social structures that were more complex than in the village. And eventually writing, being invented on both ends at about the same time, 3200 BC, and all sorts of other things. The people who wanted to be rich and famous could find good life in the larger urban settings in both ends of the Fertile Crescent. Keep that in mind as we go along both now and tomorrow. The place where you would go to get ahead in the world, culturally, cosmopolitanly, economically, whatever criteria you want on those lines, would either be in places like Ur or Babylon, or Memphis or Thebes in Egypt, cities like that. The middle of the Fertile Crescent, and that's the green oval that I'm showing on the map, is different on every regard. No world-class river running through. There's a world-famous one nowadays, the Jordan River. It's famous partly because it's the only freshwater river that runs below sea level, and it's also famous because of stories we have in here. Yeah? In the Bible. But beyond that, it's short and twisty and narrow and doesn't do a lot on the world scene. No world-class river running through. It's not a flat land, but a land of very rugged terrain, hills and valleys. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, you cannot irrigate uphill. Yeah? In this middle part, you can't. Water doesn't run uphill. And the arable lands are very tiny. It's mostly exposed rock and a lot of erosion of whatever would be up there, downward into small little spots. Hills and mountains tend to separate people rather than unite them like flowing rivers do. And so it's a land of deep divisions, both cultural and religious and language. Always has been, still is today. Deep divisions that come from the shape of the land itself, you might say. Toward the bottom of that green oval, I made a smaller yellow one. A smaller yellow one. The smaller yellow one down there, can you see it perhaps on there? That smaller yellow one is what we call the land of the Bible, the Old and New Testament, Israel, Judah, Judea, Samaria, Galilee, the heartland of the biblical story. Within that green oval, which already simply on the criteria, on the economic criteria of what it means to have a good life, that whole green oval is disadvantaged compared to Mesopotamia and Egypt. And the further south you go in the green oval, the worse it gets. Which means that on the whole, on the balance, it's that yellow land where God chose to bring Abraham and bring Moses back to, and then come in flesh himself. A very disadvantaged part of the world. Nowadays, we would say, hey, What's the advantage of living here? And most folks who read about it or talk about it or mention it notice that this is the linkage between continents. The only place where where three continents come together, and because the map includes the Saudi Peninsula here, the Arabian Peninsula here, well, let's call that a fourth one. It's essentially a fourth landmass that functions here. And this great crossroads, this land bridge, you've maybe heard that term, linking them together. Yes, but let's not also forget that it itself is a rather disadvantaged land that keeps getting run over by others. Both opportunity and threat. Now, I'm talking big picture, and this is a big picture we need to start with. The biblical writers don't talk about it a lot because it's just intuitively something everybody knew who was living and trying to make their life on it. Let me move to the next picture here. It's basically the same map, but I'm showing you names of people groups. Now, you don't have this one on yours. You have to look at it here. Names of people groups, and let me go over them quickly. Then I'm going to ask you what they have in common. They all have two things in common. All right? So top left, you see Rome. If you want to write these on your other map, you can. Rome and Greece. You have Egypt in the bottom. You have Babylon and Assyria. On the right-hand side in Mesopotamia, Mitanni. You have Persia. And in what is today modern Turkey, you have Hittites. All right? These are names of people groups, all of them except for Mitanni, names of people groups that show up somewhere in the biblical story, Old or New Testament. All right? Two things they have in common. Tell me, two things they have in common. Tell me one thing they all have in common. All of them were, all of them world powers, empires. All of them were empires. All of them world powers. All of them were the big ones of the day. All of them. All of them were. And I wrote the name. You see, Israel and Judah are there too. That's just to help us out. I'm not mentioning them. But the rest of them, I wrote them where their homeland was, the heartland, where their main spot on the map is, their capital city, right? Where they originated from. So all of them world empires. The other thing they all have in common is none of them were at home here in the green oval. None of them were at home in the green oval. But when you meet them in the story of the Bible, almost always, where do we see them doing something? In the green oval. In other words, they're on the march. They're on the prowl. They're off doing what big power empire people tend to do. Yeah? And so on and so on. Coming through. Actually, they all want to go to Egypt because Egypt is the world's supply of gold, and it also had the biggest breadbasket in the Nile Delta for grain. The reason that Rome wants to be here, that is to say, in the Oval, in the time of the New Testament, is to seal the Mediterranean border completely and suck the gold and grain out of Egypt primarily. Again, the Bible doesn't mention that. It doesn't have to. That's just part of the deal that's going on, and we can interact with some of the outflow of that when Jesus meets a centurion whose job was to make sure that happens for Rome. Yeah, in Capernaum of all places, but that's later. Now, here's an assignment. You probably can't see this very well, but if you would look at, on your own, Ezekiel chapter 27. Don't have time, but Ezekiel chapter 27, just jot it down. And what we have here in the book of Ezekiel chapter 27 is a list of the expensive stuff that was moving across these routes, actually into the city of Tyre, which was a port in this green oval, just north of Galilee. And it gives you another list of stuff that would have been another map, an economic map of the engine of Tyre in the first century. Sorry, in the 6th century BC. And then Ezekiel's opinion as to what it meant, that it wasn't coming to Israel. All this stuff was going to the Phoenicians instead. And Ezekiel had some comments about that, but I'll let you read that on your own. Now, this one, I think I put this one as well in your handout. When we look now in that yellow oval, the tight one, the southern end, the drier part of this middle of the Fertile Crescent, and that's what we need to focus on pretty much for the rest of the time between now and Sunday lunch, right? Is this section instead. When the Bible opens up its storyline, its narrative line with Abraham, Abraham comes from Mesopotamia, a place called Ur of the Chaldees, where life is pretty good, actually. And by the end of verse 10 of chapter 12 of Genesis, he's down in Egypt, where life is pretty good. And in the meantime, as he's moving through, we read that he goes to the land of Canaan. Genesis 12, 5 and 6. He goes to the land of Canaan. That's an Egyptian name for the land. That's what the Egyptians called it. They were strong here in those days. Canaan. Another term we have for the land, or the land of the Amorites, another kind of indigenous term. It's sort of like saying, Native American, I guess, if you were here, something, right? Kind of a local name. Pretty much everybody else you meet in this narrative, in the biblical narrative, comes from someplace else and wants to be here. And I'm giving you some of those names here. Top left, Phoenicians. Phoenicians are coming in from, pressing in from the coast to the north. Greece and Rome pressing in from the west. Philistines also coming in from the west. They come from the Greek Isles, actually. Egypt, of course, pressing in from Africa. You've got Hittites pressing in from the north. You've got Assyria and Babylon coming in from the northeast, right? This larger map, remember the trade routes I showed you, everything kind of meeting here, they're pressing in. You've got Semites in general, that was Abraham. He just was a Semite. I don't know what his citizenship was other than in heaven, right? But he was a Semite. Arameans or Syrians coming in from Damascus, pressing in from the northeast. You have from the southeast off the Arabian Peninsula, Nabateans in the time of the New Testament. And coming in from the east, Ammonites, Moabites, Edomites, and Israel entered from the east as well under Joshua. People coming in. People coming in. Now you notice, if your eyes are good, some of these are red and some of these are green. Did you notice that on the... This is why you should sit in the front row, right? If you can't tell which are which, you shouldn't be driving a car either, because these are stoplight colors, right? My grandpa was colorblind. He had no idea. He just looked at which he hoped the top one was the red one, right? When he was driving. Yeah. Now I have to mention something about cats and mice. Cats and mice. You tell me some of the differences between cats and mice. Both are animals, right? Cats eat mice. What else? Cats are bigger than mice. So do cats. Cats steal food. What else? Let me put it this way. If you have a cat in the house, who runs the household? The cat, right? Where does the cat like to go? Wherever it wants to. What does the cat like to eat? Whatever it wants to. When does the cat like to eat? Whenever it wants to, right? Where does it like to lie down and sleep? Wherever it wants to. Yeah, in the sun. Yeah. You'll find it in different places. Long, sharp. Have you heard cats fight? Yeah, it's a big one. How about mice? How about mice compared to cats? What's the reputation of mice? Yeah, they like to hide, don't they? They like to hide. If there was a mouse in this room, it would be somewhere, I don't know, off in the corner. And you'd see a mouse running in a room, it's usually where the floor and the wall meet, right? Just kind of running along that in the corner or something, or in the mouse hole. They like to hide back in. How much does a mouse eat? Not very much. A cat can eat everything it wants out of the bowl, and there's enough left for the mouse, right? Mice even though they have social life, even though this and that, they tend to sort of want to be left alone. Much more difficult having a meaningful pet with a mouse than with a cat. Yeah? They like to be left alone. Cats like to go on the prowl. When do mice prowl? When do mice prowl? You know the adage. When do mice prowl? When the cat's away. Then the mouse will play. Yeah? Or in German, it's the mouse will dance. Yeah? When the cat's away. So I want you to think about cat behavior, and I want you to think about mouse behavior. And I want you then to think about these people groups. Because some of them are cats and some of them are mice. Some are cats and some are mice. Let me give you the cats. Right? Basically the ones in red. The ones we saw on the earlier map that we said were what? World powers. On the prowl, marking territory, and saying it all belongs to me and I'm going to do with it what I want. Long, sharp claws. So the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Nabateans, Assyria, Babylon, and so on. Why do the cats want to be in this land? Is it because there's not enough arable soil in the Nile Delta? They have to come here and find it? They only want this land as a mechanism to move to the land of the next empire. It's just a through route. And you have to hold it, but this is not your end. No cat had its end goal to control anything in that green oval. That was a means to go someplace else. It was simply this land, this frontier that you're moving through. Now it happens that we'll meet some of these cats in the land of the Bible during the time of the Bible when they're going through or when they're putting their roots down so they can push their supply lines further. All right? But they're thinking about the big picture, economically and so on. What about the mice? That's going to be everything else. All right? That's going to be everybody else. Phoenicians, you can see the cats away here because they're coming in on their scooters, right? So the cats must be away. You have Phoenicians, you have Philistines, you have Israel. Now, today, the question always comes up, what about today? Is Israel a cat or a mouse today? That depends. Compared to the other Middle Eastern players, probably a cat. Compared to the world stage, you can argue probably a really big mouse. But in the end, when the American president or the Russian President says jump, the guy in Israel jumps in the end. All right. When it comes right down to it. Mice. Why do mice want to be here? What do mice want? Mice can live on the crumbs, and this is not a well-resourced land, so they can live on what's left. It's the land, remember, of hills and a lot of hiding places. A lot of hiding places. The cat route is on the flat coast. The hill country is full of hiding places. That's the advantage of Jerusalem, hidden up in the hills. That's the disadvantage for the poor Philistines, who were also mice, settling up at the same time, but they happened to be settling up on the cat route. But that's okay because the cat was away. When the cat comes back, the Philistines disappear from world history. But Judah, living up in the hills, survives. Today we call them Jews. They survive. Based on, God's choice, but he chose this land for them to live in and prepared it in such a way that, the situation could be. Here's an example of a cat and a mouse. All right? Who was Zedekiah? Zedekiah was the last king of Judah. The last king. Who's the cat? Yeah, you know that guy, right? Or here's another one. There it is. Necho the Egyptian Pharaoh. And the greatest king in the Old Testament, I would even put him equal to almost a David and a Solomon, Josiah. And read the end of the book of 2 Kings. And you can see what happens when Necho comes to town. All right? Now, I'm going to show you a 4,000-year chart of world history, and I only want one piece of data. You don't only notice one piece of data, okay? This is 4,000 years, 3,200 BC to 800 AD. So the beginning of writing to almost to the time of the Crusades. The top is Mesopotamia, the bottom is Egypt. Blue is cat. That's all you need to know. Blue is cat. And that middle section, about right where the equator would run through the chart, is this land between. All right? I use that term intentionally. This land between. This middle section, and you can see on the right-hand side of the map how difficult and heavy and empire heavy it was by outsiders during the time of the New Testament. And on the left-hand side of the map, you can see right in the middle of the map, actually, that string of blue going up. This is just when Abraham was coming through, just when Moses was leading Israel out of Egypt. But between the two, you can see some green and some orange in there. That's Israel and Judah. When the cat's away, right around the year 1200 BC, all the cats got sick and went home at once. Egypt fell, Assyria fell, Babylon wasn't much. Greece and Rome don't exist yet. For the most part, the Minoan civilization falls apart. All the cats go away, and this land between is empty of foreigners, and that's exactly the moment in time when God says to Moses, "Bring my people home." And they enter the land under Joshua, and they're able to form up eventually an independent kingdom. It becomes two independent kingdoms, Israel and Judah. There are other kingdoms around it that are starting to make some noise. The Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Philistines, starting to make some noise as well. And the tension that we read in the Old Testament is really mouse fights. David and Goliath. I'll mention them after the break. David and Goliath, right? These are two people fighting over a tiny, tiny corner in a valley hidden in the middle of the land. This is not Normandy, on the big stage. It's very important for the narrative of the biblical people. God chose All the way through. What does the Apostle Paul say in 1 Corinthians chapter 1? He chooses the weak to shame the strong. What if he only was interested in the people who had net worths with more than 9 zeros following the digit? You know, that would not be, I mean, maybe it's one of you, I don't know, but it's not maybe, Chris, it's not you and me, all right? Maybe it's one of you, I don't know. You know, he chooses regular people. From the beginning, he chooses regular people. Abraham, we'll talk about him later. You know, how would the gospel story be different if when Abraham came out of Ur, and God called him out of Ur and then out of Haran, he says, go to the land that I will show you. And it ended up being Monaco, south of France somewhere. You know? What if he said, get in a boat, I'm going to take you to New York? I mean, the gospel story would be different. It would be different. But he says, when you get to the land of Canaan, this is where I'm going to call you to. When he says to Moses, come out of Egypt, don't go into Saudi Arabia. Maybe someday your descendants will want all the oil, but that's not what I have for you. What I want you to do is go back to this. We'll have to define it as we go, but it's a scrappy place, this land of Israel is. Land of ancient Israel. It's a hard place to live. On just about every criteria that you can imagine. It's a hard place to live. Forming up independent kingdoms, once the cat came back, that's when the blue shows up again. And in the time of the New Testament, the heaviest blue, that's Rome. And the land when God came as Jesus to a very needy corner of the edge of the Roman Empire and the northern edge of the Jewish religious hopes and aspirations. Galilee, it was the edge of both, yet a very busy corridor for people moving about the land among the towns and villages of Galilee, doing good. Talking to people who were very much, well, what did he call them at one point? Sheep without a shepherd, yeah? And so on. A free and independent state in the time of the Old Testament, a state occupied and threatened in the time of the New Testament. When did God choose to deal with this land between? In both instances. In both instances. When they had a chance to be free and independent and when there was no possibility that they could be. He came both times. Both times. And I'll let Chris or your home pastor work out the details of what politics and religion should be together. The Bible doesn't give one answer because God came both times and said, I'm going to work with you no matter what. All right? Now, what I just said, I'm going to say again, but this time it's Moses talking. All right? Moses talking. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 10. Deuteronomy 11, verse 10. The book of Deuteronomy is the last of the 5 books of the Pentateuch. The name comes from second law. That is to say, we have the 10 Commandments show up in Exodus in real time, and then they show up again in the book of Deuteronomy as everybody is poised right at the edge of the Jordan River, ready to enter the land. Remember I said Israel came from the east? From the east, ready to enter in. And Moses speaks the 10 Commandments again. And then he unpacks what they mean in what real life is going to be like once you enter the land of promise where you're going. And he's explaining this first commandment. There is only one God, and his name is the Lord. And what does that mean in real time now that you're going to be entering the land? And Moses says, look, the land that you are about to enter to possess is not like the land of Egypt from which you came. All these people were born in Egypt. Some were born in the Sinai in between. But they hadn't been, except Joshua and Caleb, right? The rest of them hadn't been to the land. You only heard about it. But they knew Egypt. That was their intuitive home. They knew Egypt well. Moses says, where you're entering is not going to be like Egypt. And Moses could have said, with the pyramids, with the Pharaoh triumphant, the grand army, the military might, the large urban centers. He could have said all of these things are not going to be in Egypt. Not going to be in the land that you're entering. Instead, he chose one thing to mention, and that's this: where you used to sow your seed, water it with your foot like a vegetable garden. In other words, you were farmers in Egypt, up in Goshen, among other things. You were living off the land, and this is how you did it. And remember how the ends of the Fertile Crescent differ from the middle? Water running through the Nile all the time. All you have to do is get the water out of the Nile. It's bringing good mud mixed with it. Irrigate it out into the flat land around you. Set up a little system to do that. Sit back and watch it work. And the land pretty much grows itself. You used to sow your seed and water it. How do you water with your foot? Some of your English Bibles help you. Actually, they don't. Some of your English Bibles say by hand. All right? Except the word here is foot. The Hebrew word is foot. It's not by hand. All right? I use a hose. Right? That's by hand. All right? By foot. The water wheel where you pedal it and it picks up and brings isn't invented yet when Moses says this. How do you water by foot? Carry buckets? You could. But then you're kind of by hand too. Here's the deal. The Nile River is bringing water. What you do is with something called a shadoof. It is kind of by buckets. Kind of a bucket thing on a hinge that you can bring the water up and then put it into a canal. And then the canals start to work their way out like this. And the further out they go, the narrower they get, so everybody can share the water, until it gets to your field. And your field then, in your field, which is along the Nile in Egypt, what you do to prepare the ground is you put up ridges of soil about this high to separate plots. And you can see the canal is running right through the field. Here it's very little, running through the field, but water all the time. And all you do then with your foot is you can just drag your foot and cut that little earthen embankment. You can use a hoe if you want. But just like that, and the water comes into your field. And then it sits there for weeks and sinks deeply into the tops. I don't know how deep is the topsoil in fields in western New York. How deep do you have to go before you hit rock if you dig? Anybody know? I don't know. I don't live here. Yeah. How deep? The black soil here is 100 feet deep. It's not that deep in New York. No. All right? And the water just goes down, and then the capillary action of the roots just pull it up. How much rain do you get out? Almost none. In fact, where this picture was taken, the average rainfall every year is 0. All right? So the water sinks down, then you sow your seed. And it just comes. Yeah, it just comes. No rain. All right? So life is relatively easy, predictable, secure, wealthy. And the land that you are entering to possess is not like that, Moses said. But the land into which you are about to cross and possess is a land of, what did I say the middle of the Fertile Crescent was? Hills and valleys that block people, that are dry and rugged. You can't irrigate uphill. A land of hills and valleys. And as soon as Moses says that, what changed in everybody's mind? It's one word that starts with an E. Everything changes. Nothing is going to be like Egypt. Nothing. Even though there are spots of the land that are going to be flat and fertile, those are spots that are on the highways of the cats. Your homeland is going to be the dry hills between. Oh, you mice. That's where you're going to be. And where does your water, usable water, come from? What's it say? The rain of heaven, or the sky up. And who controls it in Egypt? The water? It's just coming. And you make your little system and it'll work. And who controls the rain? The answer is not you. And what changes in your psyche as to how to live here? Everything. Everything. More than that. This is the wet time of the year. You can tell because of the rainbow and the dark sky. And you can tell because of how green the view is. This is the wet, lush time of the year. Guess what Moses was looking at when he was telling everybody that they were going to be in a land of hills and valleys that drink water from the rain of heaven? They were standing across the Jordan looking eastward. What were they looking at? What was actually visibly on their horizon line? This is what they saw. For this you brought us out of Egypt? You know? This is what the Egyptians said about Canaan. They laughed about it. Poor country like that has to depend on rainfall. Who wants to live there? This is what the Egyptians would say about Canaan. And this, if you want a New Testament example, Strabo, who was a geographer from Greece who was writing at the same time as Jesus was alive. And he got his history mixed up a little bit here, but you get the idea. Strabo says this. He was writing in Greek, but we'll do it in English, okay? He says this. Now Moses led them away to this place where the settlement of Jerusalem now is. And he easily took possession of the place. For it was not a place that would be looked upon with envy, nor would yet one for which anybody would make a serious fight. Who wants it? This is the point of view of Egypt. This is the point of view of Greece. The empires of the day. Yeah? Who wants to live there? For it, although it is well supplied with water, there is a spring in Jerusalem. The part of the territory within a radius of 60 stadia, that's 7 miles. He could have said 70 miles. Rocky beneath the surface. Dry and rocky and arid. Yeah? This is Greece's view of the land, looking at it. You know, it's like, don't dare tell a native, but, you know, people don't like this land so much, right? So how does Moses resolve it? And this is the whole point. He continues the sentence this way. It is a land, a place, which the Lord, and here he gives the personal name of God, L-O-R-D. It's a name that comes from the verb to live. Eve comes from the same verb, by the way. A land for which the living one, yeah, living and active. Your God, and what's the verb? Cares. And that is a verb that the gods of Egypt didn't know much about. They didn't care so much about people. They cared about themselves. They were rather capricious and self-interested in the texts of the deed. Not all of them, but for the most part. Yep. The eyes of the Lord your God are always on it, from the beginning even to the end of the year. The eyes of the Lord your God. We're going to read something about what those eyes might be in a later session. All right, and what that might mean. All right? There's something here built in. Care, provision, protection. As my historical geography professor said, it's a land of dependency and trust. Right? Lessons that you can't learn very easily if you're living in Old Testament Egypt or New Testament Greece, places that are rather self-sufficient. Yeah. But intentionally, this land that God shows matches. I'm going to say something, but please don't quote me. Please don't quote me, because you can say things about your own people that other people can't say about your own people. You know what I mean? I'm being from Northern Illinois, lifelong fan of the Chicago Cubs. That's a baseball team. Y'all have a football team close by that's doing pretty good these days, right? That's a baseball team. And a lot of people call them the Cubbies. People who are not fans, who are fans of the other team, call them the Cubbies. You don't have the right to call them the Cubbies. You're not their fan, all right? There's something personal. There's something personal here about it. The Lord your God cares. His eyes are on it. There's a relationship. There's a knowing. Yeah, there's an inside view that's going on here. That the outsiders don't get until they become part of. That's the book of Acts. I'm 5 minutes over our first session. If we want to be gone by 9, I have to talk faster. Plus we'll have a break. It's just the beginning of an inside view. Right? Of what the Israelites sensed about the precariousness of where they are, yet chosen by God anyway. There's something. Is the term promised land? Let me end with this, and then we can take a break. Is the term promised land? You know that one, yeah? Right? Does the term promised land mean, I promise to give you everything that you want? Is that what it meant? I promise that this will be the best possible human situation that you can possibly be? My Jewish friends, please don't quote me on this. My Jewish friends say God did not choose us because we were the best. We're the most rascally people on the planet today. God chose us because he wanted to. All right? Now, if I said that, I'm anti-Semitic for saying that. But they say it about themselves. So I'm just quoting what they said. You know what I mean? So please, you have to watch what you say about who. Like about the Cubbies. All right? Is it promised land because God promises to give us everything we want? That's what some pastors think in some churches that are extremely... I don't want to offend anybody, but one of the students who came to JUC told me that in his church in California, they just redid their stage. It meant the whole sound deal, $120 million. God is giving us all of this because we deserve it. Is that what promised land means? Or does promised land mean it's a land where I promise to take care of you no matter what? Which is more powerful? Which is going to reach more people? Right? You have to decide that for yourself. I don't know what your plans are for this stage, Chris. $120 million goes a long way. All right? Can you imagine? I promise to take care of you no matter what. That's it. All right. Big picture stuff.